On April 12, 2004, 4 Italian contractors were kidnapped in Iraq. After a few days, the kidnappers executed one of the men and told the Italian government that further action would follow if their demands were not met. What followed was a hair-raising game of cat and mouse, with the infamous Delta Force soldiers paying the hostage-takers a personal visit at the end. The 4 security men had been working for an American company and were kidnapped in broad daylight in the middle of the capital, Baghdad, before being taken to a secret location. Here, Fabrizio Quattrocchi had to dig his own grave, kneel beside it, and put on a hood while the kidnappers prepared their cameras to record a video message. Just before the execution, however, Fabrizio pulled up his hood and shouted to the terrorists, "I'll show you how an Italian dies," whereupon he was killed by several shots to the back and neck. For this courage in the face of certain death, he would be posthumously awarded the Italian Gold Medal for civil valor. With the killing of the first hostage, the kidnappers sent a clear message to the Italian government. It should withdraw all its troops from the country and pay an enormous sum of money to ensure the safety of the hostages. Italy replied that they will do everything in their power to free their countrymen, but the peacekeeping mission of the Italian soldiers was out of the question. Meanwhile, the search for the prisoners was already in full swing. Houses of potential suspects were stormed all over Baghdad, and the intelligence services followed up on every lead, no matter how small. The decisive clue was finally provided by a prisoner detained during a special forces raid in June. According to the report, the kidnappers were hiding in an inconspicuous compound south of the capital. Not only were the 3 remaining Italians to be held there, but also a Polish employee who had been kidnapped as well. Once the suspected location of the hostages was found, intelligence agencies began to monitor the compound for signals and clues that might provide further information about the kidnappers or captives. A team of special forces even conducted a personal reconnaissance mission to obtain more detailed information about the structure of the compound and the daily routines of the kidnappers. As the various intelligence reports created a dense picture of the situation, Objective Medford, the codename for the hostage rescue, was launched on June 8th. The operators didn't hesitate, and within minutes they were sitting on 4 Black Hawk transport helicopters in broad daylight. Usually, special operations like this take place at night to take full advantage of the element of surprise and modern technology like night vision equipment. But by nightfall, it might already be too late, and the soldiers were running out of time. It would not have been the first time that a reliable source gave away the position of the hostages, only for them to have already been moved to another location by the time the rescue forces arrived. 2 additional helicopters served as reserve and transport vehicles for the hostages, while 4 Little Birds provided air support. Once again, the pilots of the Night Stalkers demonstrated their exceptional skills by racing to the enemy building complex at top speed and precisely landing 3 of the 20-meter-long transport helicopters inside the compound. Before the wheels had even fully touched the ground, operators jumped off the chopper and secured the building as fast as possible. After only 17 seconds, they arrived at the hostages, encountering virtually no resistance. At least one suspected kidnapper, clearly overwhelmed by the operators appearing out of nowhere, surrendered immediately and was taken captive. Meanwhile, in the next room, the soldiers took care of the hostages and verified their identities. When it became clear that the mission was a success and all of the Italian and Polish civilians were safe, one of the Deltas said, "We're Navy SEALs and here to get you out," jokingly quoting the 90s movie Navy SEALs with Charlie Sheen.
We're a SEAL team. We're here to get you out.
Afterwards, the 4 hostages and all suspects were brought back to the base unharmed. That's how the first hostage rescue by Delta Force in Iraq happened, and the next complex scenarios were not long in coming.
On the 9th of February 2019, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces commenced their offensive to clear the Baghuz pocket, the last remaining stronghold held by IS in Iraq and Syria. For 7 weeks, the SDF, with support from coalition aircraft, fought hard to dislodge the enemy from their position, and eventually on the 23rd of March 2019, the yellow flag of the SDF was raised over Baghuz, marking the end of IS's 5-year caliphate. However, whilst IS's physical territory had been completely eradicated, its leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, still remained unaccounted for. Baghdadi had been the focus of an international manhunt since 2014, when he made his first public appearance as IS's leader. Additionally, he shared details on the layout of the building, tunnel networks that ran beneath it, the number of people who lived inside, and other security details regarding the building. Despite this level of detail, for several weeks the Americans were not convinced that the information was legitimate, and asked the informant to prove that Baghdadi was 100% staying in the compound. Consequently, the informant snuck a piece of clothing and a sample of blood out of the building, passed it on to the Kurds, who in turn gave it to the Americans, who made a positive DNA match linking them to Baghdadi. After this, the US placed the compound under aerial surveillance and deployed CIA undercover agents onto the ground in Berisha, whilst the US Central Command, headed by General Kenneth Mackenzie, started preparing for a military operation. General Mackenzie later recalled, "As it became clear that we had gained fleeting and actionable intelligence on his hideout, we developed an execution-level plan designed to capture or kill him, and started preparing a special operations team for the mission." Immediately, General Mackenzie and his staff faced several problems, the most notable of which included where the compound was located, which was in a region engulfed in fighting between Al-Qaeda-linked militants and Turkish-backed rebels on one side, and the Syrian military, supported by Russian forces, on the other. As such, it was necessary to ensure deconfliction mechanisms were put in place beforehand to reduce the risk of an international incident. This mainly involved notifying Russia and Turkey, several hours before the operation, that US aircraft would be operating in the area. Meanwhile, near the Kurdish city of Erbil in northern Iraq, a temporary compound designed to replicate the one at Berisha was created to allow the assault force to rehearse and plan for the forthcoming operation. In total, approximately 70 operators were to execute the mission, the vast majority of which were from the 75th Ranger Regiment, whose objective it was to establish a perimeter around the target, whilst A Squadron and Delta Force were tasked with clearing the compound itself. Airlifting this force to Berisha would be the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, who had assembled a fleet of 8 helicopters to carry out this role. This fleet was made up of CH-47 Chinook and MH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, with several of the Black Hawks being on the direct action penetrator variant, which essentially turns the aircraft into a helicopter gunship, enabling the crew to mount heavy weapons onto its sides, which for the mission were specifically fitted with 30mm automatic cannons. Providing support to this task force will be a number of assets, including an undisclosed number of F-15 fighter aircraft, most likely from the 335th Fighter Squadron operating out of Jordan, 2 MC-130J Commander II tanker aircraft, which were to provide mid-flight air refueling to the helicopters, several MQ-9 Reaper drones deployed from Kuwait, and 5 US Navy guided missile cruisers and destroyers which were to be on standby in the Persian Gulf. Training at Erbil for several weeks, the task force was put on the highest state of readiness twice to conduct the operation, but both times they were stood down for reasons that are unknown, although the US military's withdrawal from northern Syria in early October possibly influenced these decisions. Then, sometime in mid-October, the Kurdish informant alerted the Americans to the fact that Baghdadi was preparing to move to a new safe house. This, coupled with ideal weather and lunar data, prompted US Central Command to speed up the preparations, and beginning on the 25th of October 2019, in General Mackenzie's words, "With the approval of Defense Secretary Mark Esper and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley, we extensively briefed the President on all aspects of the plan and the risks involved in its execution. Assessing all the available options, US President Donald Trump gave General Mackenzie, the operational commander, the green light to conduct the ground assault, which was given the codename of Operation Kayla Mueller by General Mark Milley, in tribute to the American aid worker who was held hostage by IS from 2013 and was known to have been personally held captive and tortured by Baghdadi himself before she was sadly killed in 2015. The next day at 2300 Syrian time on the 26th of October, Trump, accompanied by senior military and government officials, gathered in the White House Situation Room to watch the operation unfold. At the same time, 10,000 kilometers away, at an unknown staging base in either Iraq or Syria, the assault force, which had designated themselves Task Force 814 in reference to Kayla's birthday, loaded up onto the awaiting helicopters and took off for Berisha. Flying for 70 minutes, during which the helicopters were refueled mid-flight by the supporting MC-130s, the task force reached Berisha at midnight on the 26th of October. Upon arrival, the force, while still in the air, came on a small arms fire from 2 locations, which were quickly silenced by the Black Hawk helicopters. Meanwhile, in the village of Berisha, Syrian civilians came out of their homes to see what was happening. One civilian, Ahmed Mohammed, recalled, "I opened the door of my house to see what was there. I was shocked to see aircraft no more than 15 meters above the ground." With dust being thrown into the sky, the Chinooks touched down, enabling the Rangers to rush out of the cargo bay doors and establish a security perimeter around the target, whilst the operators from Delta, accompanied by an Arabic translator, disembarked, moved forward to, and surrounded the compound. Conscious that the main entrance was potentially booby-trapped, the assault teams decided to breach the building's bottom left corner wall. Storming inside, they came across 5 militants, 4 women, 2 of whom were believed to be Baghdadi's wives, and 1 man, who approached the assault teams wearing suicide vests. After issuing numerous calls for them to surrender in Arabic, all of which were ignored, the Delta operators neutralised all 5. It was here that Conan, a 5-year-old male Belgian Malinois dog and a veteran of approximately 50 Special Forces operations, were sent into the tunnel to chase after Baghdadi, whilst an explosive ordnance disposal robot was brought forward in reserve. Running down the tunnel, Baghdadi came to a dead end, and not wanting to be captured alive, he detonated his suicide vest, killing himself and the 2 children, collapsing the end of the tunnel, and lightly wounding Conan. Shortly after, with the tunnel deemed safe of explosives, several Delta operators went in, recovered Conan, and began the difficult task of finding Baghdadi's remains, and within 15 minutes, a positive DNA match had been made, confirming that it was the leader of the Islamic State. With the mission complete and the objective secured, the Delta operators conducted a search of the compound, collecting anything deemed valuable for intelligence, including laptops, cell phones, USB flash drives, and paperwork, before rendezvousing back outside to load onto the awaiting helicopters to begin the return flight to the staging area, 2 hours after they had arrived. Taken off just after 03:30 on the morning on the 27th of October 2019, Task Force 814 departed Berisha, with the supporting F-15s and the overhead MQ-9 Reaper drones, firing several cruise and guided missiles at the compound to prevent it from being used as a shrine. In total, up to 20 militants were killed on the target or in the immediate vicinity, 6 of whom were affiliated to the Islamic State, including the group's leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Whilst no US personnel were killed during the raid, 2 operators from Delta Force were lightly wounded, although the causes and extent of their injuries haven't been disclosed. Additionally, Conan, the dog, was the 3rd American casualty, suffering light wounds whilst in the tunnel. Fortunately, he returned back to duty several days later and was even invited to the White House the following month, where he was awarded a plaque and a medal for his efforts during Operation Kayla Mueller.